In 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And welcome back to another Integrated Interventions podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Dundas. I'm the Director of Education. And joining us today is Holly Goodman, the Executive Director of the Isaac Foundation, as well as Chris Garrett, our Executive Director of Integrated Interventions. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Patrick.
Yep, always appreciate it. I've been excited for this podcast because the Isaac Foundation has been doing tremendous work for a long time in the Inland Northwest. So we'll go ahead and start there for those who aren't familiar with the work that you do. Can you please tell us about the Isaac Foundation, what you guys do as a foundation, and how you got your start?
Sure. Well, I'll probably just start with how we got our start. My oldest son, Isaac, when he was 15 months old, he was identified with red flags for autism. And then right before his second birthday, he was officially diagnosed with autism. And in those days, it meant that we lost all of our insurance coverage because we live over in Washington. And the insurance structure at that time was that autism was an excluded diagnosis, so they didn't have to provide therapy interventions for a child with that diagnosis. So we struggled along. Our strategy at that point was to hire a therapist, show me what to do, and then I would just imitate it, record it, try and, just duplicate it as much as I could in my house. And then after I kind of hit a stumbling block or things were stalling, then I would, reconnect with speech therapist, occupational therapist, a floor time therapist is what we were doing at that time. And then we would get kind of through that next hurdle and away we would go. And unfortunately, my son passed away unexpectedly in 2007. And I was very angry because it is challenging when you have a child on the autism spectrum, I would imagine, with any disability, let alone then with the extra pressures of then the financial impact of that. And believe me, we did think about coming over to Idaho and living on the Idaho side because you guys over here in Idaho have the Katie Beckett waiver. And so that was just much, much, much better. Early interventions, they recognized the earlier we could provide early interventions, the better prognosis. And so anyway, after Isaac passed away, I was very angry. And so my philosophy at that point was I wanted to start a nonprofit that helped to fill the gaps financially at that point. So essentially, we gave out annual therapy grants to families to cover those out-of-pocket expenses for therapy interventions. But as time proved that no longer could Washington exclude insurance services to children with an autism diagnosis. So we had developed these wonderful relationships with families, and we recognized that there was a lot of gaps still that families were really struggling with. And so that was where, since we weren't having to put as much money into therapy grants, it freed up some funding that we could then provide other therapy support, or other different types of supports. And it started out with emotional support programs. We found that during this time, I gave birth to my son, Caleb, and he went on to be diagnosed with high-functioning autism. And ironically, I wasn't as afraid. It was still hard. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, there was, like a mourning process. It's interesting that when Isaac was diagnosed, there's a mourning process because you're expecting, I did fertility in order to have Isaac. And so you're expecting this, idyllic, idea of what it would be to be a parent and all the things you're going to do. And then you get the autism diagnosis and you realize that your track is different. And all of my friends are on that track I thought I was going to be on. There's a wonderful, it's not really a poem, but a post out there. It's like, welcome to Norway. You're preparing your whole life because you're going to go to Norway and you learn the language, you learn all the things. And then when you land, you find out you're in Spain and you don't speak the language. And so you see all of your friends in Norway and they're posting all these fantastic pictures of Norway, but you're in Spain. And you find through the process that Spain is a beautiful place, but there is a little bit of mourning at first because you're not where you thought you were going to be. And so once my son Isaac passed away, I realized that mourning the physical loss of a child is very similar to mourning the loss. Like when you get the diagnosis of autism, there is the same phases of grief because you're having to, again, you're getting adjusted to being in Spain, not in Norway. It's still beautiful and you learn how beautiful and wonderful it is. You learn the language, but it is a process. And so when my son Caleb was diagnosed, my transition was much faster. Like, not to say that there wasn't some grief and sadness, but since I'd already been to Spain, proverbially, it was just better. But I really started appreciating the reason that I think it was also easier is that, I knew some systems and how to navigate it, but I also had a network of people like parents. I had built relationships with families through the Isaac Foundation that were in the same boat. They were also in Spain. And so no longer was I the only one in Spain. I had a wonderful group of parents that I could connect with. And so that was the first chapter of then what Isaac Foundation was going to do. So we provide parent support programs, and we do those a couple times a month. We do a coffee chat. We do an evening moms group. But then we started recognizing that an interesting turn of events, again, because you build these relationships with families, an interesting turn of events was that some families were having to put services on hold for their child with autism, because the siblings were starting to struggle. We're talking about, promiscuity, exploring with alcohol and drugs, running away, life-threatening eating disorders. And it was like, whoa, hold the phone. What is happening? And so then it really became evident that in this entire equation, the population that we haven't been paying enough attention to is the neurotypical siblings. So Isaac Foundation for the last 10 years has been doing a real robust sibling support program. And so again, we do a lot of different things. I could go on and on about all the awesome things we do, but all of it stems from we have relationships with families, and we really are dialed into, what is lacking here? What are the biggest struggles? Are they, state programs? Okay, well, we can help you navigate those. But there's, unseen things that families really need. And I think that's one of the most unique things about the Isaac Foundation is that we're not part of a big organization that has the corporate, I call that the mothership. There's no mothership. And so it allows us to be more responsive to situations that are under addressed. And so, here we are 15 years later, Isaac Foundation. So that was a really long explanation about, I could go on and on because that's only just the tip of the iceberg. But in a nutshell, I call that the secret sauce to the Isaac Foundation and why we have such a diverse offering in terms of just all the programs that we have.
Well, and so like you've done a great job at seeing the needs and addressing the needs kind of as they unfolded, because there was a lot of seemed like unintended things that occurred that along with your journey. Can you talk about the community education piece, which is of course how we came into contact with you? And then I'd also like to go over to Chris so he can talk about his side of it and his journey and with autism spectrum. So I guess we'll start with the community education part, then we'll walk around because it all is kind of wide ranging and encompassing. It all finds its way back.
Well, that's exactly it. It all kind of circles back to to kind of where we started from. And so it was exactly that. It was realizing that families had a tremendous amount of fear. It started out, it was the first responder training program because families had a tremendous amount of fear that first responders didn't understand autism. They didn't understand the disability community. And there nationally were lots of examples of, individuals with autism and other disabilities having life-ending altercations with first responders. And I'm not saying law enforcement necessarily. We had a person that jumped out of a moving ambulance during transport because they were so overstimulated and escalated that they were not properly restrained and they jumped out on an interstate and died. So it wasn't just, law enforcement. So let's be clear on that regard. So we were wanting to build, fortunately in that time, a lot of firefighters and first responders utilized Isaac Foundation for grants because again, they have kids with autism and they needed support. So I went to the Firefighters Union, which was one of my sponsors, and said, hey, let's do this partnership and originally I pitched it community like a park event so that we could get acclimated to working and being around first responders. And that was when John Goodman from the Spokane Fire Department said, well, that's great, but what we really need is training. And that was that aha moment of that's an interesting idea, how many sectors is there really insufficient education on autism in particular? So we started out as a partnership with the City of Spokane Fire Department, and we were testing our curriculum there. And then teachers were like, hey, where's our training? And then other community partners, churches that have children's program that serve youth were saying, we're really struggling. Can you come in and do a training? And then we started working with group homes in Spokane. And that was where all the material is, essentially what our training does is we help you to understand what's going on inside the mind and the body of a person with autism. And we're helping to teach what the behavior is communicating. Well, it doesn't matter how you apply that in whatever context, if it's in a classroom, if it's in a first response encounter, or if it's in, context of like integrated interventions, it all works. Really the only anomaly there is that, explain to me how you work with individuals with autism so I can give you specific examples of how and why and when. And so and we've been working together with you guys now for many years. And it's been, since you keep having me come back, I'm saying it's successful. So, yeah.
Definitely.
It most definitely is. And like our most recent training that we had with you, the amount of positive feedback that came from it and those kind of aha moments that were generated as a result of that. Well, I've noticed these things, but I didn't know what do you call this exactly, or how is this explained? And you being able to touch on that really opened up a lot of doors and conversations for our mentors that work with integrated interventions.
Yeah, lots of, and there's never a training that I have done for teachers, for community partners, for like first responders, that I haven't had people come up and say, oh my goodness, like the aha moments and how this now makes total sense. And sometimes there's some, if only I could go back and rewind time because I had this one situation and you touched on that so perfectly, but I didn't know at the time. And so as long as you're taking that into the future and then having that perspective moving forward, it's still good. We can't go back and change what's done, but moving into the future with, newfound knowledge is always powerful.
Yeah, definitely. I know from my perspective, I can relate to a lot of things you're saying just on the therapist side of things. Working in the community as a therapist for a number of years before jumping on board with Integrated, I would often initially have families come with their son or daughter who was on the autism spectrum, and they would be like, they really need some help. And I'd start working with that individual, and pretty soon one of the identified problems was that mom and dad don't necessarily understand what's going on. So then it turns into education for parents. And then you find out, a year into it, well, we've got a neurotypical son or daughter who has been taking on a huge weight, and also doesn't understand what's going on, but they're expected to become a caregiver because we're both out working every day and they're home taking care of this individual. So it would morph into all these things, and before you know it, you're doing complete family work as opposed to just working with the
it's
individual
wraparound services. Yeah, it's total wraparound services.
And for counselors, they oftentimes don't go out into the community. They don't educate. They get paid for their 45 minutes or hour that they're in there, and that's it. And then it's on to the next person, and you've got a whole week in between before you see that individual again or the family. So having people in the community that can come in and educate is huge, because there's just not a lot of counselors out there that will do that or have time to do it or have even found that niche to go out and educate. So for us, and especially with Integrated, Joshua and I can talk till we're blue in the face about a wide number of things, and we get all technical and everybody's just like, what? I don't even know what you're talking about anymore. You're way outside the box here. So definitely having people in the community that are doing this and know what they're doing come in and teach our staff. We see so many, like we were talking about, aha moments. Our staff at that point, I think we had 40 people in that training.
Yes.
And so
42
many,
to be exact, I think. Yeah. It was so many. I was so impressed.
So many came up to us and they're just like, wow, now I recognize what happened with this student and this individual last week, and now I can apply these other things. So we always see a bump in productivity with our staff after those trainings, and their interactions become so much more positive. And the other side of that, the flip side of that too, is when I'm working with parents and siblings and things like that, I always go back to that, unique skill that we have. If you're more neurotypical of theory of mind, of being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, and if you can figure out what that individual you're working with, what they're thinking, you can get inside their head. They don't necessarily have the ability to do that with you. 9 times out of 10, they don't. There are individuals on the spectrum that are good at that. They're not good at translating that to how they interact with people, though. But for the most part, we have this theory of mind thing. We can put ourselves in their shoes and try to see the world from their perspective, and then you can really get in there and help.
Yes.
when you can start putting yourself there and see the world from their perspective, the way you explain things to them, all that kind of comes together, and then you can make some real progress with that individual. So, yeah, I just think the training for our staff, especially through the Isaac Foundation, has just been phenomenal. It's helped us out so much over the years.
Well, I get the question, are you, what type of therapy provider is Holly? And the answer is, I'm not one. I never went to college to be a therapy provider. But I think when you go back and you trace, how I entered the world of autism is because we had no insurance and I was having to hire providers to show me what to do. And then I had to really be dialed into observing behavior to try and figure out what it meant, because then I would go and talk to the provider. I would take a video clip and take it to the provider. I honestly think that's the reason why I am one of those parents that I can understand what's going on inside of the mind and the body, because that was, so if there is, it's very unfortunate that was the cards that we were dealt early on, but it really is beneficial in terms of just what my knowledge base is and that time that you spend getting into someone else's, space to understand what does this behavior communicate, or what is the need that needs to be addressed here. And so that's, probably where it came from. And then it's, of course, been all peer reviewed, because that's what you have to, when you don't have a degree in this site, specifically, it all has to be peer reviewed by various providers to make sure that it is, in fact, and they're saying, and that's a lot of the feedback is, I'm surprised that you know so much of this. But when you're in the trenches and you don't have any other options, it's amazing how fast you learn it. But it is true with parents. There's not a manual. They don't give you this training when, your child's diagnosed with autism, we have this fantastic training. That's not what happens.
Well, and especially all the various aspects to it, which that is something that's super important on the community education side. I want to touch on, working with, you talked about the EMS and the police. Has this understanding, you feel like, led to less incidents now that people are understanding that this individual is on the autism spectrum and these are the things we need to work out or look at? Can you touch on that? Because I think that is one of the coolest things. I mean, there's so many cool things that you do, but in terms of having more of a broader community understanding, I feel like that's kind of led to that by having these trainings.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and in Washington, there was legislation that passed in Washington state that requires first responders to have disability training. And so my John Goodman and we actually ended up falling in love and getting married. We actually sat on the work committee that came up with the training elements. Specifically, we were called in to be subject matter experts on autism. But the whole goal is that we've known for a long time that with all disabilities, first responders are under-trained, because it's not something that they spend training hours and training time learning. And so, understand that this is a 45-minute training and they wanted a segment on autism. The whole training is 45 minutes for all disabilities. And so there's 5 minutes of it that's specific to autism. And, it was the best in terms of state requirements that we could get. But in terms of working with law enforcement, working with fire departments, we also work with search and rescue and EMS. It's tremendous, because really, again, what we're teaching, you might have the benefit of a parent or caregiver that's with that person that can give you the information that they need. But there are other anomalies that we have to take into consideration. We just talked about one of them. Sometimes parents and caregivers don't understand why their child behaves the way that they do. So they really can't give you good information to understand what is happening in that moment, or what needs to be addressed, or how to de-escalate a situation. So again, there's lack of knowledge just from parents or caregivers in terms of how to support that person. So how are they going to convey it to first responders? And then too, sometimes there's just situations where you have incidences that involve the parent or caregiver and they're not in a space that they can communicate. Hey, by the way, my loved one that's meandering this room with me has autism or another disability. So it is really, really, really important that we teach, and we spend a lot of time understanding the characteristics of autism, ASD level 3, ASD level 2, and ASD level 1. And it's funny because there's been I don't think we need that amount of time focusing on the characteristics of each one. And I push back and I argue, because I really do think that it's important to understand that space and what to expect and what these terms mean. Because again, there are so many variables in a first response encounter that we can't calculate. And so we really need to spend I didn't spend as much time with you guys because you work in a space where day to day you're working with people with autism, whereas first responders, they don't. So I spend actually more time diving in deeper about what these characteristics are, because they need to be comfortable with it. And then more so, what is the behavior communicating? So when I see this, what could they be communicating, and what things am I in control of that I could support this person to help de-escalate the situation and help the person be more successful? My favorite, I love getting testimonials about how awesome the training is and good, the aha moments. I also love saying, oh, I took your training and then I had this situation and this is what happened. And because of your training, we had this great, outcome. But the ones I love the most is when it comes from first response sector, because that is the difference between potentially life and death. And that's where it matters. And so now, if I can make a shameless plug real quick, while we do train first responders to be amazing, we also have always acknowledged that, and this is where I think we got the emotional buy-in for first responders, because they were very reluctant. I've been doing this for 20 years. I'm a professional. I know, I've worked with, I've encountered people with autism before. Great. Fantastic. You're so amazing. Thank you for your service and all the things that you know. But one of the things that I think where the emotional buy-in came for first responders being more invested in it is that we spend a lot of time creating opportunities for our loved ones with autism to interact with first responders before it's a 911 critical situation. So just this last Saturday, we had in our new space, because of COVID, we haven't been able to do we called them station visits, where we would shut down a fire station for 45 minutes. We would invite our autism population to come. We would have ambulance present. We would have the police present, and then we would have the fire truck, and we would have all of those first responders, and we practiced interacting and playing games in a very positive, non-emergent situation, because we have to create positive associations, because let's be real, up until that point, the only time they've ever had access to first responders is when something traumatic is happening, right? So all of a sudden we create those opportunities so that we have positive associations with first responders in uniform. So that then helps when you have a 911 situation happen. And if they have some positive associations and not just all negative things, that also increases outcomes. And we do have expectations. We have to be careful of bubble space. We need to show first responders the fronts of our bodies. You notice I didn't say our face. I don't care if you actually look them in the eye, but you need to turn the front of your body to them so that they can help you. So we practice all of these things. And that also has really been a game changer. And again, it was in part emotional buy-in from the first responders, knowing that we do have an expectation for our population and what we want to see them to be able to do, going up and be able to, with confidence, say, here's my name, here's my address, here's my parents' phone number. So we practice those things too. So that also, I think, in terms of first response world, changed their willingness to really go all in on the training, because it's wraparound. It's not this is your guys' problem and you just have to be better. This is a community-wide piece. This is parents being part of it. Parents have to understand and know that it's important to be talking about first responders in a positive way. And again, so we do all of that, and it's really changed. It's changed perceptions.
It seems like there's a level of frustration tolerance built into that too for the individual on the spectrum that comes in and has to see the lights and hear the noises and all the different things, so that they're more used to that when the time comes. Because most of the time the first responders aren't rolling up with the lights off and the horns off and all that stuff, unless they have a big heads up ahead of time or they're trying to sneak up on somebody. But for them to just be exposed to it and have that, okay, I've been here before, I've seen this before, it bothers me, but it was okay last time.
Yeah.
Nothing bad happened to me.
Interestingly enough, we had a situation because we practice. And this young lady in particular, we had to practice. She's so auditorily sensitive that just seeing the lights on the vehicle, and the lights usually mean sirens, right? It took us probably a year to just get her really comfortable with the vehicles and getting them in the back of the ambulance, because we have to practice loading and unloading, because that's primarily how we transport, is using an ambulance, preferably over the back seat of a police car. But with that being said, they were involved in a really bad car accident, and mom was she was dazed because of the magnitude of the car accident. And when her daughter heard the siren, she says, "Oh, first responders are there to help you." And as soon as they got her out of the vehicle, she immediately walked over to the ambulance and crawled in the back of the ambulance, because that was her safe place. She had done it so many times that she was like, do. And so they were like, "Oh, this is awesome," because she's safe and she's calm and she's happy. Do. Where's my balloon glove? You know what I mean? And because it worked.
So lots of practice and repetition involved in this process.
Lots and lots of repetition.
Therapy.
That's what we tell our families is, you came one time and it was so great, but you need to come again. The other thing is, we talk about reinforcers and, ABA world and, positive reinforcers. But, sometimes what happens is our kids love first responders so much that they do naughty things, and sometimes start fires and do things like that, because guess what happens? They all come to my house and it's so great. So how we use that as in a positive way is that, if we're getting the desired behavior and they're working on a behavior chart and they are awesome and wonderful, they get to come to the station visit, or we call it Friends with First Responders now, because we're doing them at our venue. So now COVID can't lock us out of any place. So we can do them all the time. But that's that reinforcer for them. We say to parents, use this as a reward, that they are doing the things that they need to do. And again, we're trying to replace doing naughty things to bring first responders with I get to go and now spend time and do all these things, and I get to put on their bunker jackets and all the things. And it's been really positive in that way too. And parents feel a little guilty. Well, we don't want it, because we do, limit it to 15 to 17 kids, because obviously, excessive numbers are not our friend in the autism world. It creates a lot of extra stimulation. So families feel guilty about that. And I'm like, no, when we're working on improving behaviors, if that is a reward and we're not seeing some of that deviant sort of fire starting behaviors, or again, running away, because then the police officers come to start looking, we need to reward that in a positive way.
How do sensory profiles play into this process? And can you talk about the importance of sensory profiles?
The message you're going to hear repeatedly is that we're building sensory profiles. So part of the reason that people tease, "Oh, Holly's just the autism whisperer." Really, I'm not. But every time I meet a new person with autism, I'm interacting with them. I'm observing how they're interacting in their environment, how they interact with other people, and I'm building a sensory profile. So just how they're interacting in their environment gives me a lot of information about their sensory preferences and their sensory limitations. And so that then helps me know what areas, if I start seeing some escalation and more agitation, and I'm observing certain types of behavior, because behavior is communication, then again, as I'm building and I'm learning more about that person, I'm building that sensory profile. So then I know kind of what the thresholds are. And on a good day, we can maybe push some of those thresholds, where I might see some hypersensitivities, but we're really well regulated. And when we are coming, we can push some of those things. But it's all about, that's where the success is. If you understand what the behaviors you're seeing and how they're interacting in their environment, it gives you a lot of information so that you can just very subtly, without a lot of effort and a lot of, hoop-de-doo, I guess I should say, you can make modifications and adjustments, and where you can push them, when you can push them, and areas that we're not quite ready to push in. And so that's really one of the biggest things, if we understand that. Now, how this rolls out, like search and rescue. I mentioned that we teach search and rescue. When you understand the sensory profile for a person and you have to then search for them in a very vast area, knowing their sensory profile, where they would be drawn, things that they're going to seek out versus things that they need to avoid because it's overstimulating, at least then you can start, circling areas where, it's not likely that we still need to search there, but it's going to be maybe the seventh thing that we look at. So in terms of first response world, it's really important for them because again, in first response world, things are moving like at a ridiculously rate of speed. So for them, it's very important for them to be having a lot of practice observing and building sensory profiles quickly. And so that's in first response world, that's a lot of what we're doing is we're watching quick videos and now tell me what you're seeing so that I can tell that they're understanding. Just observing how they're stimming in their bedroom can give us some information about what sensory systems they are seeking or areas that they're hypersensitive, which is going to be very important information in first response world because it just moves so much faster than real time.
Well, that seems helpful for you too, Chris, like as a therapist, being able to utilize information. Essentially, you're gathering that information that can be contributed to a sensory profile in a therapeutic setting.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially working with families, that's where you get a lot of that information too, because you don't often as a therapist get to observe that. You're not in the home with the family. You're not out in public with the family, those sort of things. So a lot of that comes from gathering it from family and then working with the family on those things. And like Holly's talking about, being able to point out what do they need in those moments and what's going on. It's also important, at least for our program, because every individual on the spectrum is so different. You can do an autism training in it, and certain parts will apply to one individual in the program, and there's parts of the training that don't apply to that individual at all, but they apply fully to another individual. So being able to tease that out and get to know who you're working with is so important for our staff. And it's important to the families too, that they'll call and check and, oh, did you know that they hate running water? And you guys have been trying to force them into a shower for the last week. Okay, well, maybe there's a different way to clean your body that doesn't involve hot water dripping on you, So it's important just across the board for our staff and for us to really understand what's going on with that individual. And having that profile it's super important. And you learn something new pretty much every day,
Oh, that is so true.
Ends.
Yes. Yes, you're still honing your craft. And that's even as an autism parent for as long as I've been an autism parent and working with thousands of families who have loved ones who are different. I mean, there's not two individuals with autism that are ever the same. I'm still learning something new every day.
Yeah, and they're always pushing against our assumptions.
Yes.
We're always assuming, well, because I know this much about this individual, they're not going to like this activity. Well, then you go into the activity and all of a sudden they love it and it becomes a thing and now they're obsessed with it. And if you hadn't have tried that before, you may not have ever found a skill or something that they could really latch on to that would help them be more social, introduce them to new things in life that they weren't going to introduce themselves to. That was just too overwhelming. But because you pushed the envelope a little bit and you knew the individual and you went at it, in a manner that was comfortable for them, you can really find some cool things. Lots of people in my life on the spectrum where we've found that to be the case. Initially assuming, they won't like this. It's going to be too much. It's going to be too overwhelming. But if you push a little bit and introduce it in a way that makes sense to them, you can often find a lot of growth in those areas.
Well, and to what you're saying too, it's the sensory profile is important because if you know that they're well regulated, then trying to introduce something new is going to be something that's if that's your target time. Because again, if you're dysregulated or you're super anxious, learning doesn't happen in that space. And so it's knowing the sensory profile and knowing if they're more regulated helps you to know when you can push it. Because, I love pushing the envelope and exposing the kids to different things, whereas parents will say, oh, no, we would never do that. But again, it's all in being in that a regulated state to be able to say, yeah, this is the time we're going to try it. We're just going to try it. Yeah. And
knowing that you're the individual that likes to push them.
Yeah.
And they already know that.
Yeah.
So they know that they're going to expect that, where if the parent is the one that's never pushing them and then all of a sudden start trying to, that's dysregulating itself.
Yes.
So
what I
so
can
it
get
might
away
happen
with,
with Holly, but it's not going to happen with mom and dad. There's
Yeah.
no way. Holly's safe for this. Mom and dad are going to get pissed off and not. It's not going to go well. It's too overwhelming. So.
Well, and we talk about building social skills because we run Isaac's Clubhouse, and it's after school on Tuesdays for kids in the 6th grade through 12th. And funny thing is, again, I tell parents, like, I'm not here to teach social skills. No. Like, this isn't a place, because they're going to hate it and they will resent you bringing them here. So this is just a safe place for them to hang out and play video games. Now, do we actually learn social skills? Because here's the thing, when the kids are asking me about elements of it, I'm that safe. I'm not mom and dad telling them what to do, or a therapist provider, so we're talking about, turn taking, like, here's some strategies that I find helpful, but you decide what feels good to you. But they take it and then they're doing it. And then parents are like, well, how come they don't do this at home? They never turn take with their sibling. Oh, because it's their sibling and because they're at home. But we don't have those problems here. And things that they're willing to do in the clubhouse looks totally different. But again, I have a big thing that I make parents sign: what we are and what we are not. And we don't teach social skills. We coach on that if they're open to it and they want to learn more. But again, I'm not a therapy provider. I'm just cool Holly at the Isaac Foundation at the clubhouse.
That's a good rep to have, though, being cool Holly.
Well, I'm going to flex a little bit. It was pretty awesome.
It's better than being jerk Chris. That's for sure.
Yeah, well, I was going to say.
Or jerk Patrick, which I'm used to playing that role.
I'm the cool cat, man. Like, that's the thing is that, we have supervisors in the clubhouse. And again, it's like, oh, we're only allowed 2 snacks. And it's like, well, let's go talk to Holly. It's not that I always give in. It's just like, well, let's think, is there something that you could help me with that would earn you an extra snack? Like, oh, you want to put those away? Perfect. That would earn you a snack. You know what I mean? As opposed to just saying, no, 2 snacks per person. So it's, at least I'm like, hey, I'm open to it. Tell me what you had in mind. And then again, negotiation skills are an important, essential life skill, I think. So,
Absolutely.
Well, and has a clubhouse provided areas that you would have necessarily not thought about with working with an individual, and then you get to observe them and then able to take that information and pass it on to parents to where they can come up with additional strategies?
That's a good question. Most of the time, the parents feel really guilty because the whole plan, the premise of it is the parents need to stay with their child to help them feel comfortable when they're first starting the clubhouse. Like, it's totally fine. But usually it doesn't last very long. And then it's like, okay, you can leave now. And so sometimes their parents are then sitting in their cars, and we have lots of windows and they're looking in. But then it gets to the point where it's like, you can just drop me off and leave. And so then the parents are feeling kind of guilty about it. It's like, I feel bad because, I feel like I'm not there and I'm interested, but like, they seem so independent and like this is their space that they don't need us. So we just don't want you to think we don't care. And it's like, no, like, you are doing your job and you're just disconnecting from this, because if we start getting too much parent input, then again, it's kind of killing it for the kids in the sense that it feels like, wait a minute, you're telling my mom X, Y, or Z, and now they're trying to play this game with me at home, where now I'm doing some of the things that I do here, but I don't do at home because there's a whole nother thing going on. So really what I do is I'm more assuring parents, it's like, if you are getting 2 hours of downtime where you can go run some errands, like, that's pretty valuable. So it's cool. They're doing great, but I'm kind of letting it be. We call it Isaac's Clubhouse. And, the premise of a clubhouse is what happens at the clubhouse stays at the clubhouse. Not to say if we have some, behavior that we need to work on, or some kids have to build up to being able to stay the full 2 hours because they just get overstimulated or too hyper or whatnot. Then we just say, hey, let's try maybe an hour and 45 minutes. And, then we can just, play around with the time. But I kind of am keeping it within, because I don't feel like there's anything that we haven't been able to handle or deal with or work towards. And so again, that whole clubhouse mindset is that, this is like our space. And so it's kind of been now on the Saturday group, because on Saturdays we run all ages, all abilities. It's a little bit different because, we do want to provide some feedback about the one thing I will tell families is that, their kids will say they're terrible with remembering everybody's name. So now I have a picture Polaroid wall of the kids so that they recognize, because it's like, well, that kid in the blue coat. And then I'm like, which kid in the blue coat? Like, who was wearing a blue coat? Because they made a connection, but they don't know who it is. And so sometimes I will tell parents, that like one young lady says, oh yeah, that boy wants to date me. And the dad's like, oh yeah, okay. And I was like, well, actually, they actually are very, not inappropriately friendly, but there's definitely a connection between them. And the dad was like, wait, are you kidding? Because she misunderstands. You could give her a compliment like your artwork is beautiful and that boy's going to be my husband. And you know what I'm saying? And so you could have pushed the feather, the husband or the dad over with a feather at that point. Cause he's like, wait, really? Like there's a connect. It's like, yeah, apparently they go to school together. They know each other. And so I do give them feedback when the kids have a connection and they're wanting to have outside activities, then I will say, oh yes, they are connecting with this person. So then they can take on those more activities outside of the clubhouse because that's normal. That's what we do, right? We build friendships and then we spend more time together when that's a good connection. So I do that.
It seems like going back to your initial analogy, it gives parents a chance to visit Norway.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And they do have that feeling of guilt because they're the ones that have always been there, always provided, and they feel like that's their obligation, their duty to do that. So getting outside of that world is very foreign to them, right?
Yes.
But now you have a chance to go visit Norway for a couple hours, and then you can come back to Spain. And
sometimes I have to put some of the parents on the plane to Norway because, again, they're just so used to being that helicopter because when things go bad, and the thing is that, hey, things could go bad, but we're still going to love your kid through this, and they're not going to get kicked out of the program. And again, most of the time we can manage it because, this is not our first rodeo. And again, sometimes we have conversations and mostly we're just adjusting time, but sometimes I have to force those parents on that airplane to get them over to Norway for just a little bit, but they love it.
Yeah.
Once they get there, that freedom to be able to, that feeling like, oh, this is going to be okay.
Well, they start to identify, as I'm the parent of this child versus I'm a person and these are things. And I imagine that at some point they kind of lose their own self-identity. What's
a funny thing is the kids the other day, it came up, the term high functioning autism came up in the clubhouse. And I think one of the kids said, I have high functioning autism. So then one of the other kids who also has high functioning autism, of course, says, what's high functioning autism? And I was like, well, let's talk about terminology. So, we all know that we all have autism, but sometimes people have, additional descriptors. And so high functioning means that you're very capable and can be very independent, but you still need support. I said, but another term that I've heard is high level. And the kids are like, ooh, high level. I really like high level. And they're flipping their hair. High level. I have high level autism. I like that. And I was like, hey, perfect. You know what I mean? So they were going around testing it all out. But again, it's just, they talked about bullying at one point, in terms of what does that look like for you and in what ways do you feel like you're bullied? So we have interesting conversations. One, I did have my conversation with the kids about how to swear. And again, we don't go out saying the mother of all swear words. Again, what is the F word? We had to talk about what is the F word. People say don't say the F word, but I don't know what that is. Let me tell you. But we don't say those ones. And then we have rules. There are rules about how you can swear when it's appropriate. Again, volume is important. And the kids are like, oh yeah. Now, people will say, well, did you talk to their parents first? Nope. I did not. Because, the thing about it is these are tweens and these are kids in high school. The reality of it is that they're wanting to start doing things that are typical for their age group. And again, this is kind of that clubhouse thing. Now, again, there's rules. The first rule is that you have to talk to your parents about it. And you only get, these 3, and you can only use them 3 times, and it has to be at home with your parent supervision. Because again, if you're going to start, you need the feedback. So there's rules. So will parents find out about it? Yeah, but it's very low level, crap, it's not the worst of all worlds, so, it's very safe. But again, one of the things the kids want to do, well, can we have a movie night on a Friday night? Okay, yeah, well, talk to me about this. What kind of movie would we watch? Well, they want to watch the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah. Good Friday night flick.
Oh, right? Okay, but the thing about it is, and the parents are like, oh my gosh, no. And it's like, what do you think the other high school kids are doing? You know what I'm saying? So maybe not Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Maybe you start out with Gremlins, because in the big scheme of things, it's, not the scariest movie in the world. And there are some kids that it's just not a good idea, depending on what the content is and just concerns that we have specific to that child. But the newsflash, parents, is that we can't keep them in bubble wrap for the rest of their life. We want them to be independent, but then we're not letting them experience some of the things that are very neurotypical for their age group. And, our kids are about 3 to 5 years socially and emotionally behind. So maybe we're not at Annabelle level scary movie. Okay, but could we be at the Gremlin level of scary movie? Can we keep the lights on so it's not as scary? You know what I'm saying? So now, are there going to be still some of my Clubhouse kids that would just want to watch a Disney movie? Yes. And that's why we have a Friday night this night, and it's a Disney movie, and all the little girls and some of the boys that love to sing all the songs can come and they can belt that out, and nobody's going to care that you're disrupting the movie. And then maybe we do just put our toe in the pond and test out what would it be like to let our kids have some of that autonomy to be neurotypical like their peers and do some of those things.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always interesting to me when parents want their child to learn social skills and to be social, but then are sheltering them so much that it's almost disabling the amount of sheltering, because you can't go into a social situation without some exposure to what all the other kids are being exposed to, and be expected to fit into that mold. You don't have any context for it. How do you talk about a scary movie? And there's lots of people that are terrified by gremlins.
Yes,
if
I'm one of
that's
them.
the light one that you're introduced to, and you can bring that up and be like,
I'm one of
those movies
people.
sound scary, but man, let me tell you, if you eat after midnight, things get out of hand.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. And it's not going to be right for all of the kids. But again, we can't keep holding them back. We want them to be as neurotypical and independent as possible, but not giving them the context to understand it. So the other thing too is we, understand slang. A lot of them are not comfortable asking their parents about, well, this kid at school said blah, 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 blah. What does that mean? Ooh, okay. But you know what? Let's talk about it. Because you know what? Someone's got to talk about it.
Well, Holly, I'd like to thank you again for joining us today. This has been a really awesome opportunity to learn about the Isaac Foundation and the things that you do within the context of the foundation. And Chris, I want to say thank you as well for joining us, because it always makes it more fun when there's more than just two people in the room.
I have to be honest. Most of the time I'm training and I don't have the opportunity to sit down and have a good conversation with the two of you. So it's been lovely on my end.
Awesome. Yeah, it's been great.
It's been, tremendous for everything. I always learn a ton when I get to talk with you. So I look forward to these conversations. For people that want to get a hold of you, how do they go about that in terms of a web presence?
Sure. Our website is theisaacfoundation.org. And so that's the word the, and Isaac is very tricky. ISAAC, 2 A's. And then also, as many organizations, we're very prolific on social media. So Facebook in particular, if we have an event, you're going to read about it on social media.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. I appreciate it. And until next time, you've been listening to the Integrated Interventions Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Dundas, and we'll see you next time.